On today's show, TSN's Mark Masters joins us to recap development camp and give his thoughts on the Maple Leafs offseason to this point. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting like you want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Jays with a couple of victories over the weekend. Possibly they could become a team that you could start feeling good about betting on again. George Springer, big time 3-run knock in yesterday's ball game. I don't know. Did you watch that game at all? That had some energy. That had some passion to it, that game.
That ending was really intense.
Yeah, there was some tension in that game. I quite enjoyed it. It did. It's been a while since I felt that way about a Blue Jays game.
I actually feel like I kind of helped George Springer a little bit because a friend of mine has been so intent on buying a George Springer jersey. He brought it up. He was at my house yesterday. He brought up he wanted to get a Springer jersey. Someone I know works at Sports Check saying, "Oh, I'll get you a discount." And I said, "Why do you want to waste your money on a George Springer jersey? He's so bad." He hasn't been good this year, not at all. And
the last like 10 days, he's actually played really, really well. He's hitting like 500 or 460 in his last 10 days, like 4 or 5 homers. He's picked it up recently, but yeah, overall, it's been a tough year. But yesterday, pretty solid hit there. But this isn't the Locked On Blue Jays podcast. There is a Locked On Jays podcast. You can go and tune into that for your daily Blue Jays talk. This is the Locked On Leafs podcast. So let's get to some puck talk. And I'm happy because today we've got a very special guest joining us. It's my colleague and good pal, TSN Leafs reporter Mark Masters, the leader of Masters Nation. So he's going to join us, and we're going to touch on, what he witnessed. He was down at development camp the entire weekend, so he got to see, Ben Danford, Fraser Minten, Easton Cowan. You got to watch, Jake Muzzin hit the ice with the prospects. He was speaking with Haley Wickenheiser about her thoughts on how things have gone throughout development, to get her thoughts on, some of these players individually. So, wealth of knowledge that Mark Masters is, and he'll join us in just a couple of minutes here. And we also get to, get his thoughts on what happened throughout the course of the offseason to this point and what else is going to happen next. So without further ado, let's send it off to our conversation we had earlier today with TSN's Mark Masters. Joining us now on the Locked On Leafs podcast is Mark Masters, TSN Leafs reporter and the leader of Masters Nation. What's going on, Mark?
Not much. Great to be on with you guys.
Absolutely. We're happy to get you on. Unlike most of the people out there who are able to enjoy kind of their first weekend, the long weekend, the holiday weekend of the summer, Mark Masters was, I don't know if stuck is the right word. I mean, you enjoy doing it, but you were stuck in a hockey rink, I guess, for lack of a better word, for the most part of the holiday weekend, watching Maple Leafs development camp. Did you enjoy yourself? What'd you make of Dev Camp this year?
Yeah, I always enjoy myself. It's first of all, it's been a while since you've been in a hockey arena. I got to cover Game 5 of the Western Conference Final, Edmonton, Dallas, but it's been a while, obviously, since the Leafs went out, and it's great to get to see some of the young players they just drafted that you haven't seen before. It's great to kind of hear from them. There's always so much energy in the young guys coming up. They're so excited. So you kind of feed off that as a reporter. So I had a great experience because I've covered Wimbledon a lot over the years. I haven't been to a lot of development camps. This is my first one in a while that I've been able to really go to day in, day out. So I had a great experience. It's well run. All the management's there. Everyone's watching. It's cool.
Did anyone stick out? Anyone make a name for themselves this weekend?
Well, I mean, outside the obvious ones, Easton Cowan looked good. Fraser Minten looked good. I thought Miroslav Holinka really stood out. Certainly in the scrimmage, he had 2 goals. Had an ambitious shootout attempt that if he had converted would have been amazing. 5th round pick, you're not sure what to expect, right? Played in the Czech League last year, didn't put up many points, but even Haley Wickenheiser, assistant general manager, player development, she pointed out that he was a bright spot at this camp and showed some offensive upside, but that maybe they hadn't seen before. So for a 5th round pick being the standout at a development camp, that's probably a good thing for a Leafs organization that hasn't had a lot of picks, high picks in recent years as they've been going for it. And they got a hit on some of these lower picks. And it looks like Holinka at least has got some potential moving forward here.
And he was the one that True Living mentioned that he's going to be coming overseas. If I'm not, is he going to be? I don't know if he knows or not. Is he going to be AHL bound, or does he have CHL rights with somebody? Was he?
I believe the Edmonton Oil Kings just drafted him, so we'll see where he ends up landing. But that wouldn't be a bad spot.
Yeah, not terrible.
No, especially WHL teams have really kind of pushed ahead of the pack a little bit when it comes to like developing certain players as well. When you look at even like players, like we're talking about players that stand out with their play, but is there anyone like stood out in terms of like their presence on the ice? We talk a lot about adding size to the blue line, and then Mike has this fascination with Victor Johansson, who's just like a freakishly small player. Like, any one of those guys kind of stand out to you when you watch these development camps?
Well, Johansson is 147 pounds of excitement, a ball of energy. He was great to talk to. Maybe my favorite scrum of the whole camp. He was bursting with energy and readily admitting that he was expecting to be picked in the 7th round or not at all. And then, how excited they were when the Leafs took him in the 4th round. So, why didn't you expect to get picked? He's like, it just felt like there was a lot of better players than me. I was like, oh, that's very honest. But his English was great. Really impressive kid. The Swedes, they tend to speak amazing English. It's so impressive. But, I didn't notice him getting overwhelmed. I mean, it's a smaller rink than he's used to, of course, in North America. So maybe there's an adjustment there. But Wickenheiser compared him to John Klingberg, who was a similar size coming over, and just how he's got a bit of length to his game, even if he doesn't have the weight yet. And he seemed pretty smart. And it's certainly, I was impressed with him. In terms of a presence on the ice, the guy I think of is Fraser Minten, obviously a guy that everyone kind of looks at because he played in the NHL last year and was captain of Canada's World Junior team. And is just such a smart guy, right? So, he's going to be in the right place and he's going to be doing all the drills properly. And he's the kind of guy that, a bunch of players talk to that they look at as a leader and they want to follow. And, in the scrimmage on Sunday, Easton Cowan scored early on, and he told us afterwards that Minten told him, I'm going to win the face-off, so just be ready. And that's exactly how it played out. And Cowan picked a spot, of course, but Minten kind of called the play there. So Minten's presence was notable at this camp.
Well, I'm curious if you think, and I guess you didn't get to go to development camp last year, but you got to watch Cowan and Minten play throughout the Maple Leafs preseason, so you got to watch them. Have you seen a growth in their game? And that's a little tough, I suppose, when they're playing against youth or people within their age as opposed to actual NHLers like they do in preseason. But when you look at Cowan, you look at Minten, did you see kind of a leap from their game from last September to now that maybe thinks, hey, maybe one of these kids can't compete for one of the NHL spots with the Maple Leafs?
Well, they're both competing for the spots, and they both are certainly capable, it feels like, of being in the mix and winning a spot. Minten did it last year, right? Like, why can't he, take the extra step this year and stay for a whole season? We'll see. Minten, like, his baseline game is, he's so smart, such a great two-way guy that you tend to feel the same way when you watch him a lot. They are working with him to add a bit more of a dynamicness, is how Wickenheiser phrased it, to his offensive play, so that he can bury some of these chances in tight, because he usually puts himself in a pretty good position, but hasn't had the eye-popping offensive numbers maybe that Cowan, of course, put up in the last season. And he's more of a subtle player. So they're working with, they see a lot of room for him to grow there. And maybe maybe it's something where the American Hockey League is the right spot for him in terms of getting more of those offensive chances. It is hard in the NHL to create offense, and you might get one chance a game. If you don't put it in, your confidence can go down in a hurry. So that's Minten. And then Cowan, it just feels like, I saw him at obviously the preseason last year. He was one of the standouts with just this engine that doesn't stop, and he didn't seem to be intimidated. And remember that first preseason game, they had him out in a 6-on-5 situation with all the big names, and it just felt like that was the kind of the rocket ship. And throughout it, every time you watched him, it just felt like the confidence was growing. And I saw him at the World Juniors, which wasn't a great tournament for him, but he made the team as a younger guy, and it just showed you how much faith that they had in him. And then he goes back to the OHLs, the most outstanding player, MVP of the playoffs, and he wills London, or helps lead London all the way to the Memorial Cup final. And they come up just a bit short, but he was all over, his fingerprints all over that run, and saying all the right things, and certainly no shrinking violet. So he's focusing on the defensive side. He feels like that's going to be the key for him. Craig Berube, a new coach, you got to show him he can be reliable and trustworthy at the defensive end, taking checks the right way as a smaller guy to not put himself out of the play. So I think that, Cowan's, they both got the right mindset. Like Minten said, I'm not taking anything for granted. I played in the NHL last year. It doesn't mean anything coming into this camp. Nothing will be given to me. And Cowan saying, I'm got my goal and I want to make the team. So I love the way both of these young guys are approaching it. They're pretty mature, like more mature beyond their years, clearly, to get to this point. And they seem to handle the market well. They don't seem to be fazed by anything. So one or both of them could make the team. You certainly can see that. Not easy, new coach. It's a big league. Like a size-wise, we know Trey Living has had his who he looks to get, how he wants to play, but I wouldn't put it past either guy to crack the roster.
That's what I was gonna ask you next, Mark. It's like the Craig Berube factor in all this. Like, I don't know if he was really present during development camp, or if he, I obviously I didn't see him speak to reporters. So, like, what's kind of his impact you think will be on these younger guys?
Well, it's hard to say without, you hear stories, you've watched him from afar. I wasn't at the draft when he spoke to the media. So it's hard to really judge, right? We know that he likes to, he values the work ethic that most coaches do, wants to, have a, gritty, grindy kind of game to lead into the offense. So it's hard to say. It really is hard to say. He was at the camp. I saw him. Not sure if he was there every day, but I definitely saw him at one of the days. And both prospects, Minten and Cowan, were asked kind of if they had talked to Berube, and they hadn't. Minten mentioned that he ran into Daryl Sadeur, the longtime NHL defenseman, at a hockey tournament I think he just wound up at for some reason in Whistler before coming to development camp. And he said that Sadeur, who had coached with Berube in Chicago in the AHL, and also was on a staff with Mike Yeo and Berube in St. Louis, had basically told him that, if he can trust you, you're going to get opportunities. He's a straight shooter. So at least he got some background there on what to expect from Berube, which is probably what we all would have expected to hear anyway. But that will be interesting. That will be the big storyline at training camp, right? Is the new coach, the impact he makes, how he handles the young guys, how he handles everyone. So that's definitely going to be top of mind and top of everyone's kind of story list heading into training camp.
Yeah, and I do want to dig into that a little bit more in just a minute here. But before, to kind of put a bow and wrap up our conversation about Leafs development camp, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask to get your thoughts and your first impressions on the Maple Leafs first-round pick, Ben Danford.
Yeah, it's funny. We haven't talked about the first-round pick.
The shiny new toy.
Listen, he's a defensive defense, or he's been known for his defense, right? Like more so than his offense. He made a very nice play to set up the opening goal by Hlinka in the scrimmage on Sunday, diving down below the goal line, feeding him in the slot. And he has said he wants to show off more of that offensive upside. His numbers clearly didn't jump off the page offensively in the OHL, but Wickenheiser mentioned they see a lot of untapped potential there that, the numbers haven't revealed that yet. But he's a good athlete off the ice. Seems like he's a smart guy as well, and can pick up things quickly. So I was impressed with him. I would say at this camp, he came as advertised. and I'm excited to see what he can do because we saw how Cowan developed, and Wes Clark's kind of got this reputation now of finding guys, picking them a little bit earlier than they most anticipated, and then they just take off. So I'm curious and interested to see what he does in Oshawa. He seems to he's just kind of like a lot of the young guys, like just full of energy right now. He's saying he was learning he enjoyed the seminars and learning how to cook, and because you're going to live on your own soon, and like the little off ice stuff. I said, how comfortable are you in the kitchen now? He's like, I'm not a master chef, but I'm heading in the right direction. And I think that probably is apropos of his entire game right now. So it was a good camp for Ben Danford.
Well, I remember texting you this. I think it was after I listened to like his first media scrum, and I'm like, this guy reminds me of John Tavares. Like, it legitimately, just the way that he spoke, I think it was very like diplomatic. It seemed like he's just a future captain in waiting. Like he's the media training. You said he picks things up quick. He picked that up pretty damn quick.
Geez, future captain in training, the Toronto hype machine is revving up here. Let's just see where the development goes here. But yeah, it was funny. He got a text from Tavares right after getting drafted. It really meant a lot to him. Obviously, he grew up a Leafs fan, right? And Jen's connection there. So that was really kind of a surreal moment for him. Another interesting element of development camp was Jake Muzzin on the ice and working with the defensemen. And Danford, of course, grew up a Leafs fan and watched him and actually kind of sees him as a bit of a role model with that gritty game, still able to drive play. So Cade Weber mentioned Muzzin was like really high on the impact Muzzin had. And Wickenheiser said that they're going to get Muzzin more involved. He was hired as a pro scout, but they want to get him more involved in the player development side moving forward here with some of the defensemen. And that's a great mentor. I mean, I can't think of many better guys in terms of someone who worked, undrafted guy, had a great career, won a Stanley Cup, knows what it's like in Toronto, just fresh out of the game, which, is great, right? Knows exactly what these guys are feeling. So that was another little story off the ice, was Jake Muzzin kind of growing into a role with the organization and making an impact on the young guys. Like Cade Weber was just like, I got text from him as soon as I got acquired from the Hurricanes at the trade deadline, and he was giving me advice. Who should I watch in the playoffs? Who should I study? And so Jake Muzzin making an impression, and I think that's a great development for the Leafs, obviously.
You love to see it. You absolutely love to see it. Jake Muzzin, time cut short in the NHL, I think we could all say, was playing some great hockey prior to the injuries. But, it's good to see that he's still in the game, still loves it enough to be around the rink, and now going to try and help some of the Maple Leafs youth develop. I love to hear that. We're with Mark Masters. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We'll continue our conversation with the leader of Masters Nation. We'll get into what's going on with the parent club, the big club, and what to look forward to for the rest of the summer. That's coming up next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up of any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back into the Locked On at Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you, and we are joined by Mark Masters, who is down at Leafs development camp all weekend long, and he is a TSN Leafs reporter. And Mark, it's interesting. There's been a lot of fanfare about what the Maple Leafs have done this offseason. And, obviously they bring in Chris Tanev, who I've always been a big fan of Tanev. Even when he was his first time around through free agency, thought he'd be a great, target for the Maple Leafs. Perfect partner for Morgan Riley. 4 years later, they finally are able to get him. And, we'll see how that all plays out. They bring in Oliver Ekman-Larsson. They sign Anthony Stolarz to be the backup or 1B, however it shakes out, to be part of the Tendy tandem with Joseph Woll. But then outside of that, they're kind of bringing back the pack. They're running it back again. They changed the coach, obviously. Keefe out, Berube in. But on the ice, kind of looks still very similar, doesn't it, Mark?
Yeah, locker cleanout day. There's so much emotion, and there's everything's on the table. We're gonna, patterns persist, and you can only get fool me once, shame on you. All that stuff, and it does look very similar, and it's felt like a very similar offseason that we gotten used to. Obviously, we have the new GM, and we have a new coach now, but the core is together, and got to find that right shot for Morgan Riley. So like, listen, are they better on defense for sure, right? Like, it seems Chris Tanev, as you mentioned, is a great player. It seems like the perfect fit beside Morgan Riley. He can shoot right. It's amazing. So and Oliver Ekman-Larsson coming off a Stanley Cup run with the Florida Panthers. The 4-year term, who knows? Tanev 6 years, and Yanni Hakanpää's health. They haven't even announced it yet. I know even Trey Living mentioned that they had signed him, but they haven't announced it formally yet. And there's been reporting from Steve Simmons that people in Dallas don't expect him to play again. So we'll see where that goes. Yeah. So I don't know what to say. I was expecting a bigger change this offseason, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
When you consider the whole core four, and you just mentioned everything on the table, and then things kind of staying the same, do you think this was just more so, it was always going to be tough to kind of envision a deal going down, especially with the no movement clauses that pretty much all these guys had? Or do you think this was just, what, we're bringing in a new coach, a new vision here could potentially be the change that this team was looking to have?
Yeah, a new coach, probably overdue. As much respect as I have for Sheldon Keefe, I enjoyed covering him, but it felt like there should have been a change there sooner. It feels like a lot of their decisions, the hard decisions, have come a little late in this era, right? Like Babcock probably shouldn't have started that last season with the way it went, and the fact that him and Dubas weren't clearly on the same page. It felt like, it feels like that will be, they're hoping, right? Like that will be the big change. Even though it better be. It just feels like, obviously Brendan Shanahan comes in as president, and things were not very good in Toronto. The team was the franchise was a bit of a laughing stock here. This great market, passionate fans, and why can't they put a winner together? Now they've obviously consistently made the playoffs with some of the greatest regular seasons we've seen in franchise history, some of the greatest talents we've seen in franchise history. But obviously the playoffs have been so familiar, such familiar stories playing out. It's felt pretty obvious to people on the outside that this recipe doesn't work. And yet they've been really reluctant to make the change. And now they've obviously boxed themselves in to a degree with all these no move clauses. And did they truly consider it? Maybe, they can look around and say, like, we're not getting, the other teams aren't knocking our door down, so we're not going to start up something with Mitch Marner or whatever. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but it feels like they are banking on the Berube factor being the big change for this season, and it might be. So we'll see.
We'll see what ends up happening, but obviously I think a lot of Leaf fans are kind of lukewarm on what's happening. They like the additions. They like what they've done with the blue line. Chris Tanev obviously was a big addition, but up front, and I was listening to our colleagues Jonas and Myrtle and what they had to say on the Leaf Report, and they kept hammering the fact that yes, they upgraded the blue line, but they didn't do anything up front, like nothing. There's not a single addition that they've made. Yet they've lost Tyler Bertuzzi. Like they've lost goals, if anything, and goal scoring has kind of always been the issue for the team come playoff time. That's kind of a different story with the big boys not showing up in the playoffs. But do you envision the forward group getting some sort of impact-ish player, like a top 9 type of talent between now and training camp, or do you think that maybe most of the heavy lifting for this team is done to this point?
Feels like the heavy lifting is done. We'll see. We talked about Cowan and Minten possibly making the team. So those, in theory, could be additions that they certainly. Cowan is a guy that didn't play last year. Minten, 4 games. We'll see. Can't bank on those young guys, right? You can't. Mm-hmm. But I think Matthew Nyes is a guy who's going to take another step next season, right? You would think. Is Austin Matthews going to pot in 69 again? Probably not. I don't put it past him. He's a pretty special guy.
70 mark. The goal is now 70.
Yeah. William Nylander, he got 40 and then it just kind of stopped, right? Like he had a tough end of the season in terms of production. Could he take it to another level? I suppose, but it feels like that he's hit his, 40 is kind of the ceiling for him. We'll see. But scoring in the regular season, you scoring in the playoffs is what's been a problem. I feel like they've been able to score enough in the regular season, and maybe with Berube, they're gonna play a little differently. And they won't need to score as much, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe they'll get better goaltending, right? Like Samsonov was a tire fire for the first half of last season. They credit to him for getting back on track, but they were needing to score a lot of goals to win his starts early in the year. So it all plays out differently. Is the forward group worse to have lost Bertuzzi, not replace him? Yes, it seems that way, but it's a long year. There's going to be a lot of interesting things that happen, and they can make a trade at the deadline too, right? They don't have a ton of capital. I guess they got that second round pick now for next year, but they can make a trade at the deadline to get a winger. Those are usually the easier players to acquire, right? A scoring winger maybe at the deadline versus a defenseman. So they felt like it was hard to find the defenseman outside of free agency, and that's why they went out and addressed it and made the changes they did. And we'll see if that can be enough at least to change the feel, the coach, and the switching out half the defense. In theory, we'll see if Hakanpää is a factor, but they're hoping that will be enough of a change. And as for the playoffs, I mean, I don't know. It's
wake me up in April.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
I think we're all pretty numb to it until they show that they're not that way. Maybe Mark Savar's got the keys to unlock the power play success in the playoffs, like Carberry was able to do for that one round. But it's just hard to see anything in terms of the playoffs right now as we sit here with the limited changes it feels like that have been made.
We'll see. Dave, you got any last questions here for Mark?
I think for me, it's just also, do you expect maybe any sort of other moves to come along? I've heard David Kampf's name kind of come up as maybe a guy that they would look to move. Do you think that's something that Leafs would consider doing, even just to free up a little bit of space? Because they do have to sign Connor Dewar to a new deal, and they might look to make some upgrades or look to make some additions. Do you see like a David Kampf trade as a potential option down the road?
Well, everything's on the table. So perhaps Kampf will be on his way out. I don't know. I mean, the later you get into the offseason, it feels less likely, right? Yeah. It feels more and more like this is the group. But you never know, right? You never know. A trade pops up, something happens. But what's their center depth, right? So, it's
not a lot.
Matthews, Tavares, right? But Tavares is getting on in years. I know a lot of people have said he should be playing on the wing. You got Holmberg in the mix there. Minten might make the team. Kampf. I mean, it's hard to get. There's a reason he got the Domi. Yes, Domi, who a lot of people maybe don't think is best fitted as a center. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise based on how they're lined up right now that Domi ends up starting the year as a center and playing there a lot of the year until they make a change. But you can't have enough centers, right? And they don't have a ton. And if someone gets hurt, and it just you see the dominoes falling, right? So, So I don't know. I don't know what the market would be for David Kampf. I don't know. I guess it would change maybe the feel a bit, but I don't know. It seems unlikely at this point. It feels like, barring a little move here and there, that this is probably what we're looking at going into camp. But we'll see.
Well, there's still a couple months left here to enjoy the summer. Maybe there'll be a move or two to report on, Mark. But what else you got planned for the summer? I guess you get to take some time off finally, or what?
Yeah. I've gone on with SC with Jay tonight just to talk similar stuff, Leafs off season. I got some other kind of interviews, just Zoom interviews. I'll keep an eye on tennis for sure, even though I'm not at Wimbledon. I like to keep in touch with the Canadian players and do some Zoom calls there if I can. And then I'm really excited. Hockey Canada, obviously I cover the World Juniors, and Hockey Canada last year, there was no summer camp to go to. They did it virtually. And I think that probably hurt them in terms of how things played out with that group. But they are doing a camp this year. They're down in Windsor at the end of the month. And then they go to Plymouth to USA Hockey Arena. and there's games against Sweden and Finland and the US. So I'll be down there with Craig J. Button, TSN's director of scouting, and getting my look at some of the, and Easton Cowan will be there. I believe Noah Chadwick is going to be there, another Leafs prospect. So, hey, maybe we'll have another 2 Leafs prospects on the World Junior team, which would be really cool, which for a team that's, all these questions about, Cowan probably intends to be on the Leafs, but we'll see how it all plays out. I mean, if he goes back, he'll be obviously one of the top players on the team, maybe a captain. You never know. And Chadwick is a guy who really stepped up this season in Lethbridge, and CHL Scholastic Player of the Year, really smart kid. I spoke to him recently. So I'm looking forward to getting down there to Windsor, to Plymouth, seeing those guys, the American kids, and seeing how the World Junior team is shaping up, because, they're in Ottawa. And I'm sure John Tavares is going to see a lot of fun highlights of his success there in 2009. So I'm excited to be back in Canada for that this year. So it gets me pumped in the middle of the summer to kind of talk World Juniors and see those guys and be around some of the elite kids. And you get to see the Swedes and the Finns and the Americans too. So I'm really pumped as crazy as it might sound, to have a summer trip to Plymouth. I'm pretty pumped up for that.
I wonder if my guy, Victor Johansson, would be part of the Swedish contingent. Possibly. Guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
You don't seem too.
Listen, 147 pounds. I was watching the scrimmage, and I said, hey, that might be the weight of his heart, the way he plays, the way he speaks. But anyway, I don't put anything past him, but maybe he's a little off the World Junior radar. Sweden's pretty good.
Apparently it was off everyone's radar except for the Maple Leafs.
Until the Leafs and Wes Clark says, hey, this kid, and who's to doubt them, right?
I'm rooting for the kid. I'm rooting for him. I think he was all smiles in his media availability.
It was awesome.
And I became a Johansson fan that day.
I want to see the jersey.
Hey, I'll toss one on. He ends up making his Maple Leafs debut. We'll have to get me a Johansson jersey.
It's going to be on the wall behind David there next time we speak.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Exactly.
I need to cover more space. I don't want any.
Well, you can get rid of that.
Riley.
Get rid of the Michael Gallup.
No Matthews
anymore.
Oh yeah, they got the Gallup.
Is there Matthews there?
So Matthews is a little more pricey, Mark. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe once we get another sponsor, I can throw.
The price isn't going down either. Yeah. Keeps adding some hardware.
It is not. All right, Mark. Really appreciate it as always, pal. And hopefully you get to enjoy a little bit of your summer. And we'll get right back at it come September.
Yeah, it goes fast. It goes fast, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does. Really appreciate taking the time. And everyone, make sure you keep an eye on what's going on with Mark Masters on tsn.ca and through his Twitter, Mark H. Masters on X, I guess is what it is now referred to as. Really appreciate it, Mark. All right, so that was our conversation with Mark Masters. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. That was a good conversation. That guy, wealth of knowledge. He's been doing it for a long time. So really happy to be able to get him on, Dave.
Yeah, especially this time of year. This is it's nice that Mark's able to take some time out, because a lot of other people have run to the cottage.
That's true. That's true. Mark's 365 though. Like when hockey's not happening, he's like, all right, what's next? What can I do? All right, let's start talking to guys for summer showcase for the World Juniors. Okay, what's going on in the tennis world? Let's reach out to Milos. Let's reach out to Dennis. The guy's just go consistently working. He's the man of the people though. Like he's the leader of Masters Nation. Masters Nation is a thing because they know how dedicated and hardworking this guy is. So midsummer, Mark Masters, he's out there and he's finding the stories and the scoops for all of us out here. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything over the weekend you wanted to bring up before we take off for the day?
Nothing Leafs related. I'm wondering what the heck the Buffalo Sabres are doing. I'm as somebody who for the Leafs, this is actually great news that the Sabres are cutting with some of their young talent and getting you're getting a guaranteed NHL player, but they're also giving up a top 10 pick.
Yeah. So for those who missed it, Friday afternoon, a decent trade was made between the Edmonton Oilers and the Buffalo Sabres. Edmonton trading away Ryan McLeod, who had 4 points throughout the Stanley Cup run was outscored 12-4 at 5-on-5, I might add as well, during the Stanley Cup run, and spent a night up in the press box because he wasn't playing so well that he was a healthy scratch for a game throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs. Well, they somehow were able to turn that asset, in quotations, into the 2022 9th overall pick in the draft, Matthew Savoy. Really talented kid. He had 30 goals in 34 games in the WHL last year, 74 points in like 34 games. It's unbelievable. He had 6-game stint in the American League, had 5 points in those 6 games, did play one NHL game before getting sent back down to junior. Played for Team Canada at the World Champion at the juniors. So he's a really young, talented player, and I am also very perplexed of what the Buffalo Sabres are doing here. They traded him for McLeod, who's, I mean, at best, he could be a decent third line center, but like, you're looking at a bona fide fourth liner. Maybe he could be a good third liner. I know the fancy stats look good defensively for him. I've spoken with a few people from Buffalo, and they really like the fancy stats. That's all I'll say.
He can skate really fast.
Yeah, he's fast, and he can defend is what they keep telling me. And apparently they had so many good prospects that they could just give them away for nothing. I don't quite understand it. It's not that McLeod's not a decent player and a useful player for the Sabres, and yes, they could use him, and I think that he'll help the team. But why you're giving up a top 10 pick for him from 2 years ago makes zero sense to me. But that's what the Buffalo Sabres have been up to. They haven't been able to sign anyone in free agency, so I guess they felt the only way we could get it done is through the trade route. And I guess Edmonton wanted an expensive return for a guy who they literally had to pretty much get off their books because they needed a cap dump to fit what they were doing this offseason, and somehow got a top prospect for it. One who's from St. Albert, Alberta, basically Edmonton's next door neighbor. So a hometown kid at that. It all worked out perfectly for Jeff Jackson and the Edmonton Oilers. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what Buffalo's doing either. I had lots of words on that trade, and I exchanged them with Joe DiBiase of Locked On Sabres. He knows where I stand on that one, and he knows that I believe that Buffalo made a grave mistake with that deal. But we'll see. To be fair, Savoy's a prospect at this point. You never truly know what's going to happen. The Sabres betting that he's not going to turn out to be a stud superstar, but now you've got a goal scoring, offensively dynamic winger who can, go to Edmonton with a couple of really talented centermen. It might work out very well for him. He is definitely a happy camper, I would imagine, today than he was a couple of days ago. All right, buddy, we'll leave it there. We'll get back into what's going on around the league and into the Maple Leafs on tomorrow's show. And that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. I'd like to thank Mark Masters once again for joining us today as well. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Leave a like and a comment down below on YouTube if you would. That'd be really, really appreciated. A 5-star and a review on iTunes as well would be awesome. Helps for the algorithm, helps us grow, which is what we're trying to achieve here. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.